Black History Month is here, and I am thinking about Kay Kemble's life partner, Wilmetta Stockton, known as Teeny Stockton by other musicians, friends, and family. Perfect timing, because I just came across, in one of the many boxes of memorabilia that came from Kay and Teeny's family, a little glass jar textured like pineapple glass, with a very rusted-on steel lid and a wrinkled paper label that I would never be able to read if I didn't recognize what the jar was. The items had been kept in a New Orleans storage unit from the time of Hurricane Katrina till about 10 years ago. Time and wear and tear and constant humidity have really messed up that paper label, but I knew from working on this project that this was a jar which had once held Enchanted Nile hair pomade. And here's why this jar made me think of Teeny Stockton. Teeny was from Kansas City, and when she was growing up, her father was a barber. Her grandfather had also been a barber, and he'd worked in the days when a black man could own a barber shop, but he could not serve black customers. Only white customers all day long. Kind of the shoeshine business model, but up one level, with a shop and a nice white jacket. Teeny's father left school at 16 to be a barber's apprentice. Not to his father, but to another man in the community who had already been a mentor. Teeny's grandfather put in very long hours, not only cutting hair, but also doing the accounts, cleaning and repairing the shop, and so on. Frankly, he often wasn't home because after business hours, the shop became a place where black people were welcome, but not to get haircuts. They played cards for money. So Teeny's father, Wilmetta, wasn't close to his father, who he never really saw. But there was an older man in the neighborhood named Dr. Clark, who had a number of medical specialties, including chiropractics and podiatry. He was also a skilled barber. Dr. Clark had a small office, but he mostly made house calls. This was about 1910, and Dr. Clark could not afford a horse, let alone a Model T. So he traveled to patients' homes by bicycle. It was actually a bike that converted from a regular bike to a tandem bike. And once Wilmetta, who was Teeny's father, became Dr. Clark's apprentice, the two of them would travel that way to patients' homes. Wilmetta pedaled in the back, and Dr. Clark pedaled and steered in front with his medical bag in a wire basket on the handlebars. It was Dr. Clark who taught the young Wilmetta, who would later marry and become Teeny Stockton's father, that patent medicines and cosmetic products at that time were often toxic. It was not unusual for things like lead and arsenic to be added intentionally. Dr. Clark himself had really great healthy hair, and Wilmetta quickly learned that his mentor disdained the pomades of the time, which were often made with lard, sheep tallow, and, if you can believe it, bear grease. Crude oil also found its way in, as everyone at the time was very excited about oil wells, and petroleum, even unrefined, was seen as a health product. Dr. Clark also felt strongly that chemical hair straightening and the use of hot combs were damaging to the hair. The former breaking up the proteins, and the latter destroying the hydrogen bonds in the shafts of the hair. Hot combs could also singe the hair and dry it out. So Dr. Clark mixed up his own emollient product for his personal use. This involved coconut oil, some sort of wax, and eucalyptus oil. Dr. Clark taught Wilmette about how your own personal grooming and self-care would attract clients who wanted to emulate your healthy good looks. The effects of the natural pomades didn't last as long as chemical straighteners, and they didn't remove all of the curl from the hair. Dr. Clark modeled for the young Wilmette Stockton that the goal was not to try to look European, but to look good with the hair Mother Nature had given you. Wilmette's father died suddenly when Wilmette was 19, and so after 3 years as Dr. Clark's apprentice, he was ready to take over the family business as a licensed barber. Unlike his own father, Wilmette could balance his career with family life. He hired assistant barbers so he could spend time with his 2 sons and 2 daughters. Teenie was the baby of the family, with 2 brothers that were much older than she was, and a sister who was a couple of years older. Wilmette had retired early because he'd always been a gifted piano player, and he wanted to study piano formally and really learn music theory and all the stuff he might have studied if he hadn't been sent to become an apprentice at 16. While he was pursuing that, Teenie's brothers took joint ownership of the shop. They were good at what they did, and they moved the business to a larger shop where there was room to display retail products. Meanwhile, Teenie's sister had moved away to St. Louis, and Teenie graduated high school and then went off here and there with her saxophone, trying to find work as a musician wherever she could. She worked cleaning houses or whatever she could find when she couldn't do what she was good at. But the legacy of her father's time with Dr. Clark carried down, and at the family barber shop, Teenie's father, and then later his sons, had also taken the healthy approach to caring for their customers' hair. At that time, they were going against the grain with that. The first widely available chemical straightener was G.A. Morgan's Hair Refining Cream, CREME, which came out around the time that Wilmette and Dr. Clark were pedaling that tandem bicycle around the streets of Kansas City. About 20 years after that, Samuel B. Fuller, who grew up as a sharecropper, bought a truckload of soap from a company called Boyer International Laboratories. Boyer made Parisian soaps created from, listen to this, a secret formula from the only non-destroyed manual on soaps and perfumes from a forbidden book from the 18th century, which he found in a Parisian junk shop. Right. Well, anyway, S.B. Fuller sold that Boyer soap door to door on the south side of Chicago. This was in addition to working full-time at an insurance company. The soap business grew until he had a staff of salespeople to move 30 different products. Fuller ended up buying Boyer Laboratories. The Boyer Company, now owned by Fuller, had a number of African-American chemists, and one of them, George E. Johnson, decided to strike out on his own in the 1950s. Johnson began with a product for men called Ultra Wave, and later he had enormous success with Afro Sheen and other hair care products for black customers. Finding that old jar of pomade sent me off on a little research adventure. I got a couple of books from the library. I'll give that information in the description box. And I also looked at some history websites. The little fancy glass jar I found among the jumbled contents of that shipping box, which had sat for years in a New Orleans storage unit, made me really curious. It's so frustrating that I can't get the lid off the jar to smell the residual hair product but I bet it has a healthy, natural eucalyptus fragrance. Very different from Gold Sheen Shampoo, the product which sponsored the all-girl orchestra for which Kay was bandleader and Teenie was a saxophonist. Gold Sheen was famous in the retail industry for its long shelf life, which was due to a significant splash of formaldehyde added to each bottle. Kay herself privately refused to use the product because she said she didn't want to pickle her brain. But that shampoo, heavy on the formaldehyde, was nothing compared to early 20th century chemical hair straighteners, which were made with lye, and heaven knows what else they put in them. Even modern hair straightening products contain stuff which is linked to reproductive cancers in women, and that's with modern oversight. So I imagine that Kay was not totally sorry when she parted ways with the Gold Sheen Company over cultural issues, because it meant she didn't have to keep promoting a product that she didn't feel was safe to use. Fortunately, it all worked out okay. Teenie already had an option for the two of them. Because of her family's deep roots in the barbershop network, Teenie had some casual connections with the family of Madam C.J. Walker. Specifically, Teenie slightly knew Madam Walker's daughter, Alelia, but she was much better acquainted with a friend of Alelia's called Ernesta Collins. Collins had worked for the Walker Company, and like others I have mentioned in this video, she had that enterprising spirit. Collins was looking for safer, healthier hair products for Black people, and she saw a future in creating a product that could be sold through both barbershops and beauty shops. Ernesta Collins had managed, with Alelia's influence I'm sure, to attract some investors, and she was able to finance a tour for the former Gold Sheen Shampoo Orchestra, or as many of the players who had not left the music world or found another gig. The group was renamed the Enchanted Nile Evening Orchestra. With Teenie's background in natural hair care from her father, who'd worked as an apprentice to bicycling Dr. Clark, she undoubtedly gave tips to Ernesta Collins on the formulation of Enchanted Nile hair pomade. If only we could get that jar open without ruining it and sniff that faint fragrance from long ago. Alas, we can't do that, and a photo of the jar, with its rusty lid and tattered label, wouldn't show the fabulousness of the original jar design. I've seen that in some rough drafts of the advertising material, which I found among the clusters of paperwork I keep uncovering. I used those drafts and a non-glass jar to create my best replica of the original label art on a jar of Enchanted Nile pomade. Thanks for listening. If this is the first video you've heard about the Kay Kemble project, welcome. You'll find some background on Kay's life elsewhere on this channel. Back soon with another video.